I realized I had become a ghost in my own home the day my daughter, Brenda, started rearranging my living room without asking. I stood by the kitchen island, holding my morning coffee, watching her push my favorite reading chair into a dark corner to make room for a massive, modern side table she had bought on sale. She did not ask if I liked it. She did not ask if I minded. She simply assumed my space was an extension of hers. For the past 3 years, since my husband passed, Brenda and her husband, Greg, treated my paid-off house like a free storage unit and a drop-in daycare. Boxes of Greg's old sports equipment lined my garage. Brenda's out-of-season clothes filled my guest room closets. They dropped their 2 young children off on weekends with vague promises of picking them up early, only to return long after dinner. I never complained. I thought I was helping them build their life. I assumed they respected me. But grief has a funny way of making you accept crumbs and call it a meal. That morning, I calmly walked over, gripped the back of my reading chair, and pulled it back to its original spot by the window. Brenda sighed, dropping her hands to her hips. "Mom, I'm trying to modernize this space. Greg's parents are coming for Christmas, and we want everything to look perfect." I took a slow sip of my coffee. "Then you should decorate your own house." Brenda. She rolled her eyes, annoyed by my minor rebellion. "Our place is too small for hosting. We are doing it here. It makes the most sense. Besides, you don't even use half this house." She turned away, already texting on her phone, entirely missing the way my grip tightened on my mug. I was not a mother to her anymore. I was a free venue. And the holiday invasion was just beginning. 3 days before Christmas, my house ceased to be mine. Brenda and Greg arrived with boxes of groceries, cheap decorations, and Greg's parents, Arthur and Helen. Arthur was a loud man who complained about the draft in the hallway, while Helen inspected my clean countertops as if searching for a health code violation. Brenda immediately took over the kitchen. She shoved my Tupperware into a bottom drawer to make room for her specialty baking pans. When I walked in to prepare my usual afternoon tea, Helen was sitting at my dining table, tapping her manicured fingers. "Marjorie, be a dear and fetch some more ice. Arthur likes his drinks very cold," Helen instructed, not even looking up from her magazine. I paused. I looked at the ice bucket, then at Helen. I did not argue. I did not sigh. I simply poured my hot water, picked up my tea, and walked right past her to the back porch. Through the glass door, I watched Brenda scramble to fulfill Helen's demand, apologizing profusely for the delay. Brenda catered to them like royalty, desperate for their approval. Meanwhile, she expected me to shrink into the wallpaper. Later that evening, I went downstairs to grab a fresh towel from the laundry room. The house was quiet, most everyone having gone to bed. But as I passed the cracked door of the guest room, I heard Greg's hushed voice. "We need to bring it up after the holidays. She doesn't need a 4-bedroom house," Brenda whispered back. "I know. If we rent our place out, we can move in here. It solves all our financial problems." "What about your mother?" Greg asked. "Oh, she won't mind," Brenda dismissed easily. "We can clear out the basement for her. It has a small window. She just reads and knits anyway. She'll be fine down there." I stood in the dark hallway, the fabric of the clean towel rough against my hands. The basement. They wanted to move into my home, take my upstairs bedrooms, and put me in the damp, unfinished basement, where I currently kept old paint cans and holiday decorations. And worse, Brenda assumed I would just nod and accept it, like I had accepted everything else. I did not burst into the room. I did not cry. Crying was a waste of water and energy. Instead, I walked back to my bedroom, locked the door, and opened my laptop. I reviewed my bank statements. For 2 years, I had been paying for their kids' swimming lessons. My credit card was linked to Brenda's grocery delivery app. I had been subsidizing their lifestyle, and their gratitude was a plan to bury me in my own cellar. The next morning, I woke up early. While the house slept, I went into the garage. I found a stack of heavy-duty cardboard boxes. Moving quietly, I began packing. I packed Greg's golf clubs. I packed Brenda's winter coats. I packed the designer shoes she hid from her husband. I taped every box shut with precise, heavy lines of packing tape. I stacked them neatly by the garage door. Then, I made a phone call to a local locksmith I had known for years. I asked him to come by on Christmas morning, right when everyone would be gathered around the tree. When I finally walked into the kitchen, Brenda was already frantically making pancakes for Arthur. "Mom, can you set the table? We are in a rush." I poured myself a cup of black coffee. "No," I replied smoothly, leaning against the counter. "I have things to do." Brenda blinked, confused by the quiet weight in my voice. Christmas morning was approaching, and I was entirely prepared. Christmas morning arrived with a fresh coat of snow outside and a suffocating layer of tension inside. The living room smelled of pine and expensive cinnamon candles Brenda had bought using my Amazon account. Everyone gathered around the tree. Brenda played the perfect hostess in her matching silk pajamas, handing out beautifully wrapped boxes. Arthur and Helen received crystal wine glasses and a cashmere throw. Greg opened a designer watch. The children tore into expensive toys that Brenda had charged to my emergency credit card just 3 weeks prior. I sat in my favorite chair by the window, my hands resting quietly in my lap. I watched the pile of gifts shrink. Brenda reached under the lower branches, pulled out the final box, and handed it to Greg. The space beneath the tree was entirely empty. Brenda stood up, smoothing her pajamas. She looked at me, a calculated smirk playing on her lips. She wanted to impress her in-laws with her dominance in this house. "Well, look at that," Brenda mocked, her voice loud enough for the whole room to hear. "Maybe Santa forgot you too." "Mom?" Greg chuckled. Helen offered a thin, pitying smile. They expected me to lower my head. They expected me to act like the sad, forgotten widow who would eventually retreat to the kitchen to clean up their mess. Instead, I smiled, a genuine, relaxed smile that reached my eyes. "Actually," I announced, my voice clear and steady, cutting through the leftover laughter, "I brought my own gift." The chuckles died instantly. Arthur lowered his new glass. Brenda's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. I stood up, my posture perfectly straight, and walked down the hallway to my bedroom. I reached under my bed and pulled out the heavy, flat box I had prepared the night before. It was wrapped in plain brown paper, tied tightly with a thick black cord. When I returned to the living room, all eyes were locked on me. The atmosphere had shifted from arrogant comfort to tense curiosity. I set the large, flat box directly on the center of the coffee table, pushing aside Brenda's decorative centerpieces to make room. "What is this supposed to be?" Brenda asked, her tone entirely stripped of its earlier humor. I did not answer immediately. I pulled a pair of scissors from my pocket, cut the thick black cord, and peeled the brown paper away. Underneath was a large, glass-front shadow box frame. I lifted it so everyone could see. Inside the frame, pinned neatly to a velvet backing, were 3 items. The first was the spare brass key to my front door that I had given Brenda 5 years ago. The second was the emergency credit card with my name on it, cut cleanly down the middle. The third was a printed floor plan of my basement, with a red X drawn fiercely through the center, beneath the items. I had printed a single line in bold, black ink. The Bank of Mom is permanently closed. Locks changed today. The room went completely silent. You could hear the snow brushing against the window pane. Brenda stared at the frame. All the color drained from her face, leaving her looking pale and suddenly very small. Greg shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting from the cut credit card to the floor plan. He knew exactly what that meant. Arthur cleared his throat, bewildered. Helen, what on earth is going on here? I think Brenda should explain, I offered calmly, resting my hands on the back of my chair. Since she and Greg were planning to move into my home and put me in the basement, I decided to save them the trouble of packing my things. Brenda's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Greg was the first to recover. He stood up, his face flushing red with embarrassment and anger. You were snooping on us. You listened to a private conversation. There are no private conversations in my house when the topic is stealing my home, I corrected, my tone never rising above a conversational volume. I don't snoop. I simply live here. Something you both seem to have forgotten. Brenda finally found her voice. She stepped forward, trying to lower her tone so Arthur and Helen wouldn't hear the panic. Mom, please, don't do this right now. We were just brainstorming. Finances are tight. You have all this empty space. My space, I interrupted, cutting her off cleanly. Paid for by my husband and me, not a free safety net for your poor financial choices. Helen scoffed from the sofa. Well, I have never seen such a display. Kicking your own family out on Christmas. I turned my gaze to Helen. She flinched slightly under my stare. You aren't my family. Helen, you are guests who couldn't even say thank you for a cup of tea. And your visit is over. I looked back at my daughter. I hired a locksmith. He finished the back doors an hour ago and is finishing the front door right now. The credit card you used to buy those toys is canceled. And all the boxes you stored in my garage are currently sitting at the end of my driveway, waiting for you to load them into your cars. Brenda looked horrified. You put my things in the snow. I put your things off my property. You have exactly 1 hour to pack your bags and leave. Greg crossed his arms, puffing out his chest. We aren't leaving. It's Christmas morning. You can't just throw us out into the cold. I looked at Greg, noting the desperate bluff in his posture. He thought, because I was an older woman, I would eventually back down to avoid a scene. He thought wrong. I did not argue. I turned my back to them and walked straight into the hallway, opening the metal panel of the electrical breaker box. With 3 sharp clicks, I flipped the switches for the living room, the kitchen, and the guest bedrooms. The house plunged into shadows. The Christmas tree lights died. The holiday music cutting off abruptly left a ringing silence in its wake. Mom! What are you doing? Brenda yelled from the darkness. I walked back into the living room and unlatched the large bay window. I pushed it wide open. A blast of freezing 20-degree winter wind swept into the room, instantly dropping the temperature. Helen let out a sharp gasp, pulling her new cashmere throw around her shoulders. 55 minutes, I announced, keeping my voice perfectly even. After that, I open the rest of the windows. Arthur stood up instantly. Grab the coats. Helen, we are leaving. I will not sit here and freeze in the dark. The sheer panic of discomfort finally broke Brenda's stubbornness. Without the lights or the heat, the house suddenly felt entirely hostile to them. They scrambled. I stood quietly by the open window, watching them trip over wrapping paper in the dim light, shoving clothes into suitcases. Brenda stopped by the door, holding a trash bag full of gifts. She looked at me, expecting me to show a hint of regret. "You are going to regret this. You'll be all alone." I was already alone. "Brenda," I replied smoothly. "Now, I'm just comfortable." The heavy front door clicked shut. As the taillights faded down the icy street, I closed the window, flipped the breakers back on, and enjoyed my quiet house. Over the next month, Brenda deployed the only weapon she thought she had left: absolute silence. She blocked my number and restricted my access to photos of the grandchildren on social media. She assumed the quiet would break me. She expected me to panic, to call Greg crying, begging to see the kids and offering my credit card as an apology. She severely miscalculated. Instead of waiting by the phone, I embraced the silence. Without Brenda's constant grocery demands, I had an extra $800 in my account by the end of January. Without her boxes in the guest room, I finally had the space to hire a painter. I chose a bright, cheerful yellow. I turned the room into a real library, complete with a reading nook and a heavy oak desk. I joined a local gardening club. I took a weekend trip to a coastal town I hadn't visited since my husband died. I slept 8 hours a night without being startled awake by Greg dropping off the kids at dawn because he wanted to go golfing. The silence wasn't a punishment. It was a sanctuary. Meanwhile, Brenda's life was fraying. Without my credit card, they had to pay out of pocket for their lavish Christmas spending. Without my free babysitting, they were forced to hire local teenagers who charged $20 an hour and refused to do laundry. Without my garage, they had to rent a storage unit across town. The financial reality of adulthood was finally hitting them, and I was no longer the shock absorber. By mid-February, the silence broke. I was sitting in my newly painted library, sipping tea and watching the snow melt on the front lawn, when a familiar SUV pulled heavily into my driveway. Brenda stepped out, looking exhausted. Her designer coat wrinkled. She marched to the front door, expecting her old key to work. I listened to her jiggle the handle, fail, and finally ring the bell. I opened the door but kept the heavy brass chain firmly latched across the frame. Brenda stood on the porch, her shoulders slumped, dark circles visible under her eyes. She looked past me, trying to glimpse into the warm hallway. "Mom, it's freezing out here. Let me in," she demanded, defaulting to her old habit of giving orders. I did not move. "I'm not expecting visitors today. Brenda," she blinked, shocked by the physical barrier. "Visitors, I'm your daughter. Look, Greg and I are drowning. The daycare costs are insane, and my boss is threatening to cut my hours if I keep leaving early. We need you to watch the kids on Tuesdays and Thursdays again." She didn't apologize. She didn't acknowledge Christmas. She just presented me with her problem, assuming I would fix it. "I have a book club on Tuesdays, and I volunteer on Thursdays." I replied simply, "You will have to figure out your own child care." Brenda gripped the door frame. "Are you serious? You are punishing your own grandchildren because you're mad at me." "I love my grandchildren very much," I corrected, keeping my voice devoid of anger. "But I am not your employee. And I am not punishing anyone. I am simply protecting my peace." She stared at me, searching my face for the guilt she used to manipulate so easily. She found absolutely none. Her shoulders dropped further, defeat finally settling in. "So what? That's it. We just never talk again." That depends entirely on you, I said. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a single folded piece of paper, and slipped it through the crack in the door. Read it. If you can handle it, you know where to find me. Before she could unfold it, I closed the heavy wooden door and threw the deadbolt. The piece of paper I handed Brenda contained 3 simple, non-negotiable rules. First, any visits with the grandchildren must be scheduled 48 hours in advance. Second, no personal items were to be stored at my house under any circumstances. Third, no discussions about my finances, my property, or loans of any kind. It took Brenda 3 full weeks to call me. When she finally did, her tone was different. It was careful. It was respectful. She asked if she could bring the kids over for lunch on a Saturday. I checked my calendar, confirmed I was free, and agreed. When they arrived, Brenda didn't immediately raid the fridge. She sat on the sofa, holding her tea, while I read a story to the kids on the rug. Greg didn't come, which was perfectly fine with me. When the afternoon ended, Brenda packed up their coats, ensured the kids put their toys away, and left exactly when she said she would. There was no tearful reunion. There was no grand apology that magically erased years of disrespect. But there was a boundary, hard and clear, and for the first time in her adult life, Brenda respected it because she knew the consequences of crossing it. I didn't win a lawsuit, and I didn't exact some complex revenge. I simply stopped holding the door open for people who only walked in to take things out. Now, on quiet evenings, I sit in my yellow library. The house is peaceful. The locks are secure. I am a mother, a grandmother, and a widow. But most importantly, I am the absolute owner of my own life. And nobody gets to put me in the basement ever again.